The notification showed up on a Tuesday afternoon while I was out back stacking firewood. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I was 63 years old, semi-retired, and the biggest problem I thought I had that week was a cracked fascia board on the garage that needed replacing before the freeze set in. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out, figuring it was my son, or maybe the hardware store confirming a pickup. Instead, it was an alert from our joint bank account. An e-transfer. $5,000, sent to a name I didn't recognize. Sent by my wife. I stood there holding a piece of firewood, staring at that notification for probably 30 seconds. My first thought was fraud. Someone had gotten into her account. I went inside, set the wood down on the mat, and called her. She picked up on the second ring, which was normal. She sounded fine, which was normal. I asked her about the transfer, and there was a pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds. But it was a different kind of pause than I'd heard from her in 41 years of marriage. "Oh, that's for the Airbnb," she said. "For Simone's bachelorette trip. I told you about it." She hadn't. I said okay and let it go, because that's what you do after 4 decades with someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You assume you forgot. But I didn't forget. I'm the one who manages our finances. Always have been. I track the accounts, file the taxes, keep the spreadsheets. When you spend 35 years as a project manager for a municipal water authority, that kind of habit becomes part of how you think. Orderly, documented, cross-referenced. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying closer attention, not in a paranoid way, just attentive. And I found things that didn't add up. Another transfer, smaller. Receipts for restaurants I hadn't been to with her. An overnight stay at a hotel in Ottawa. She'd told me she was visiting her sister in Kingston. I have a sister-in-law in Kingston. I called her just to chat, and she mentioned she hadn't seen my wife in months. Said it casually, the way you do when you don't know you're stepping on a landmine. I didn't say anything. I just listened. I want to be clear about something because I know what people think when they hear a story like this. They think the husband must have seen it coming. Must have ignored the son. Must have been checked out. Emotionally unavailable, working too much, or drinking too much, or some other version of a man who drove his wife away. I retired early so we could travel together. We went to Portugal 2 years ago. We had plans for New Zealand. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. We still held hands at the movies, for God's sake. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't absent. And none of that matters now, but I want it on the record. The name on that first transfer was Sheldon. I found out who he was on a Wednesday evening in November, when the temperature had dropped to -9 and my wife told me she was going to a book club. She's been in a book club for 12 years. I know most of the women. I've met their husbands at Christmas parties. I drove past the community center where they meet. Her car wasn't there. I'm not proud of that drive. I'm not proud of what I did next either, which was to sit in a parking lot at a Tim Hortons for an hour and a half, drinking bad coffee and looking up the name on that transfer. It didn't take long. There aren't many Sheldons in a city of our size. I found a LinkedIn profile. Mid-40s. Financial advisor. Worked out of an office in the West End. I recognized the office building. My wife had mentioned that firm before, years ago. She'd mentioned a colleague who used them for her retirement portfolio. That's how they would have met. That's how these things usually start, not dramatically, not with intention, just proximity and opportunity, and whatever was missing between us that I apparently couldn't see. I went home and put dinner on. She came back around 9:30, smelling like the cold and something else, a warmth underneath, the kind that comes from wine and central heating, and the particular comfort of being somewhere you shouldn't be. I handed her a cup of tea. We watched the news together. She fell asleep on the couch, and I sat in the chair next to her, watching the weather forecast, and I felt like a stranger in my own living room. I spent the next 3 weeks getting quiet and getting organized. I know that sounds strange, but I've managed projects my whole career. When something breaks down, you don't panic. You assess, you document, you figure out what you're actually dealing with before you decide what to do about it. So I pulled together what I had. Bank records, mileage on her car that didn't match her stated destinations, a hotel receipt I found in the recycling by accident. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't go through her phone. I had enough. I also called our family lawyer, a woman I've known for 20 years who handled our wills and the deed transfer when we bought the place in Lanark County. I asked her a general question about financial entanglements in a separation scenario. Just general. She asked me if everything was all right. I told her I was asking for a friend. She knew I wasn't asking for a friend. But she answered the question. My wife's name is Rosalind. We've been married since 1983. We have 2 grown children, a son in Winnipeg and a daughter here in town. We have 3 grandchildren. We built a life together that looked, from the outside, and often from the inside too, like something real and solid and worth protecting. I don't know when it started with Sheldon. I don't know, and I stopped trying to calculate it, because it doesn't actually change the shape of the wound. What I know is that on a Friday evening in late November, I sat down at the kitchen table after supper, while she was loading the dishwasher, and I put a folder on the table. She saw it and went still. She didn't ask what it was. That told me everything I needed to know about what she already knew I knew. Sit down, I said. She sat. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not a man who raises his voice. I opened the folder, and I walked her through it, piece by piece. The transfer, the hotel, the mileage, the phone call from her sister about not having seen her. I kept my voice even, the way I'd learned to keep it even in meetings, when a contractor was 2 weeks late and $1 million over budget. You don't let them see the pressure. You stay factual, she cried before I finished the second page. I kept going. When I was done, I closed the folder and I waited. She told me she was sorry. She told me it had started at a professional event she'd attended 18 months ago. A financial planning seminar she went to with a colleague from her office. She said she hadn't planned it. She said she tried to end it twice. She said she didn't know what she wanted. 18 months. I did the math quietly, the way I do. 18 months is 78 weeks. It's roughly 547 days. It's every long weekend we'd had together, every Sunday morning, every Thanksgiving, Christmas, her birthday in March where I took her to that restaurant she'd wanted to try in the market. It's all of that, happening on top of something else I knew nothing about. I told her I'd heard enough for now and I went for a walk. It was -15 and I didn't take my hat. I walked down the street and around the block and back again. And when I got home, I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat in the kitchen, and I looked at the wall for a long time. She slept in the guest room that night without me asking her to. That was something, I suppose. What happened next was that I thought I was dealing with the worst of it. The discovery, the confrontation, the hollow feeling of looking at someone you've spent 40 years with and not quite recognizing them anymore. I thought that was the hard part. I was wrong. 10 days later, Rosalind came to me and told me she needed to talk. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table. Her hands were folded in front of her, the way she holds them when she's bracing herself. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, which was probably accurate. She told me she was pregnant. She was 61 years old. I'd known her since she was 22. We'd been through 2 pregnancies, 2 labors, 23 years of school runs and hockey practices and parent-teacher interviews. I thought that chapter of our lives was so far behind us it had a different climate. She said it was early. She said she didn't know what she was going to do. She said she was scared. I sat very still. I've become very good at sitting still. I said, "Is it mine?" And she looked at the table and she said, "No. There's a particular kind of silence that follows a sentence like that. It's not the absence of sound. It's the presence of something crushing." I've heard the expression, "the ground fell out from under me," my whole life, and I always thought it was a cliché, the kind of thing people say when they want to dramatize a bad moment. But sitting at that table, I understood it completely. Everything I thought was solid simply wasn't. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and stood at the sink looking out at the backyard. The bird feeder I'd installed in September was dusted with snow. A chickadee was sitting on it. I watched that chickadee for about 30 seconds. Then I turned around and I told her I needed her to leave the house for a few hours. She left. I called my son in Winnipeg. He's 40 years old, calm in a crisis. He gets that from me, I think, or at least I'd like to think so. I told him what was happening as plainly as I could. There was a long silence on his end. Then he said, "Dad, are you okay?" I said I didn't know yet. He said he was booking a flight. I told him not to yet. I told him I needed to get through the next week first. What I didn't know was that the next week was going to involve Rosalind's family. She has 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. The sister I've already mentioned, close with, talks to her twice a week. One brother is in Calgary, largely removed from day-to-day family business. The other one is here in town. His name is Vic. He's 58, retired early from the trades, spends his winters trying to convince everyone that his opinions are the room's most valuable resource. He and I have never had a warm relationship. We've been polite for 40 years, which is its own kind of work. 4 days after Rosalind told me about the pregnancy, I got a call from Vic. He said he'd heard what was going on. He said he was worried about Rosalind. He said, and I want to be precise here, because the wording matters. He said he thought I needed to think carefully about what kind of man I wanted to be. I asked him what he meant. He said that Rosalind was in a very vulnerable position, that she needed support right now, not judgment. He said that what had happened was complicated, that long marriages go through phases, that these things aren't always black and white. He said that I'd been married to her for 40 years, and that walking away from that because of a mistake showed a lack of character on my part. A lack of character. I let him finish. I'm good at letting people finish. Then I said, Vic, I appreciate your concern for your sister. I want you to know I have no intention of discussing my marriage with you. He didn't take that well. He raised his voice. He said I was being cold. He said I was punishing Rosalind for being human. He said, and this one genuinely surprised me, he said I should think about the grandchildren and what a broken family would do to them. I said, the grandchildren have nothing to do with this. He said I was being selfish. I said goodbye and I hung up. 3 hours later, I got a call from Rosalind's mother. She's 84, sharp as a tack, a woman I've genuinely respected for 4 decades. She didn't shout. She was careful and sad, and she said she hoped I would find it in my heart to give Rosalind a chance to make this right. She said family was everything. She said she knew I was a good man and that good men find a way through. I told her I loved her, because I do, and I told her this wasn't something she should be in the middle of. She said she understood, but she hoped I'd take my time. I said I had been, for weeks. I don't want to turn Rosalind's family into villains. They love her. They're scared. When someone you love does something catastrophic, the instinct is to try to limit the damage, to find a version of the outcome where things can be stitched back together. I understand that impulse. But here's what I kept coming back to. Nobody called me to ask if I was all right. Not Vic. Not her sister. Not her mother, until she called to advocate for Rosalind. Not a single member of her family picked up the phone to say, I can't imagine what you're going through. That told me a lot about where I stood. My daughter came over on a Saturday morning, a week after the calls from Vic and her grandmother. She sat in my kitchen with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and she looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was a teenager trying to figure out whether she was in trouble. She said, Dad, what are you going to do? I told her I knew what I was going to do. She asked me if I was sure. I told her I had been sure since the night Rosalind told me about the pregnancy. What came after? The calls from Vic, the conversation with her grandmother, a stilted email from Rosalind's sister suggesting couples counseling. None of that changed anything. It only clarified things. My daughter nodded. She didn't argue with me. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her to just keep showing up, which she always has. She's a good kid. She's 40 now, which means she's not really a kid, but she's mine, and that particular relationship doesn't change no matter how old either of us gets. I filed the paperwork in early December. My lawyer handled it efficiently and without drama. Rosalind was cooperative in a way that told me she'd expected it. We agreed on a mediator for the asset division. We've been in the same house for 30 years. We have the property in Lanark County. We have pension income, RSPs, a joint investment account, the car situation. These things take time to untangle. They take patience and documentation and a willingness to sit in rooms that feel very different than they used to. But they get done. Sheldon, as it turned out, did not step up. Rosalind made a decision about the pregnancy on her own, something I only know because my daughter told me months later, and I didn't ask for more detail than that. It's not my story to tell beyond that point. Whatever is happening in Rosalind's life now is hers to navigate, and whatever grief she's carrying, I hope she finds people who can help her carry it. I genuinely mean that, which sometimes surprises me. Vic called me one more time in January to tell me I was making a mistake and that I'd regret this. I let him say his piece. Then I told him, calmly and without rancor, that I'd spent 41 years being a good husband, that I'd done nothing that justified what happened, and that I'd done nothing that justified the way his family had responded to it either. I told him I wished him well. I haven't heard from him since. My son flew in for 2 weeks in February. We drove out to the property in Lanark County one afternoon. It was cold and still, the kind of February day where the whole world looks like it's made of pewter and white, and we walked along the back fence line and didn't say much. At one point he put his hand on my shoulder and kept walking, And I thought about all the ways a person doesn't realize what they have until they're counting what they've lost. But that's the thing about loss. It doesn't only take, it also sorts. After the dust started to settle, after the mediation sessions and the asset division and the conversations with the kids about what the holidays would look like going forward, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I started going to the Saturday morning market by the river, just by myself with a thermos of coffee, looking at the vegetables and the bread and the handmade furniture, and occasionally talking to strangers about nothing in particular. It sounds small. It is small. But there's something about choosing how to spend a Saturday morning that turns out to feel like a lot more than it sounds. A man I used to work with, a retired engineer named Humphrey, who I've known for 15 years, saw me there one Saturday, and we ended up having breakfast at the diner across the street. I hadn't seen him in 2 years. He'd been through his own divorce, back in the 90s, and he talked about it with the particular equanimity of someone who'd had 30 years to make peace with it. He said the first year is just about getting through. The second year is when you start to figure out who you are now. I asked him if he'd figured it out. He laughed and said mostly, "We've had breakfast 3 more times since then. It's a quiet thing, but it's mine. I'm 63 years old. I have 30 years of pension and savings behind me. I have 2 children I'm proud of and 3 grandchildren I adore. I have a property in Lanark County with a cracked fascia board on the garage that I will get to eventually, and a bird feeder in the backyard that needs refilling about twice a week, and a Saturday morning routine that belongs entirely to me. The house is quieter than it used to be. Some mornings I notice the quiet more than others, but I've stopped trying to fill it with anything that doesn't fit." The last thing Rosalind said to me, in the driveway on the day she moved out, was that she was sorry she'd wasted my time. I told her she hadn't. I meant it. We built something real, and real things don't become false just because they end. That's a thing it took me the better part of a year to understand, and I'm not entirely sure I have it right yet. But I'm working on it. I went inside and put the kettle on.